Hey everyone, welcome to Limbo. Today I have a very special episode with Peyton Harvey. So Peyton is actually hosting an Interintellect Salon on what does the body know, and I'm participating in this salon, and this was Peyton's first salon. So I reached out to her and said, "Well, do you want to have a conversation about it in my podcast?" And she said yes, and we had a very good conversation about a bunch of different things. So Peyton in this talk talks about her experience with cancer and how that changed her life, but also the impact that that had in her favorite passion when she was 12 years old, which was dancing. And so we kind of connected on this idea of having this identity built around something that eventually gets taken away from you by health. As some of you may know, I was a jazz musician before being an educator and an entrepreneur, and I had a wrist injury that basically made me switch careers. And even though I was able to get back at playing and finishing the course, um, that identity crisis was one of the most painful moments in my life. And some people think that I'm overreacting when I mention this, but it's true. It really was. It was so great to speak with Peyton because I feel like she could somehow identify with this idea of having your artistic identity get and take away from you, and suddenly you have to find a way to deal with that. So we talked about that. We talked about dancing, the different approaches in classical dancing and maybe modern dancing, but also about, of course, our salon and our relationship with our own bodies, and how do we process certain things, and what are some of the ways that we can connect creative actions to the actual body. How does writing play a role in all of this? So it was a phenomenal conversation. Peyton is awesome, and you should definitely join the salon happening on May 25th. Okay, the links are in the description, so make sure that you follow her. And if this is a topic that interests you, join us in this Interintellect Salon. Now, quick word from our sponsors. The first one is, of course, the Socratic Experience, the school where I work in. We're revolutionizing education through the use of Socratic method. You can know more about us at thesocraticexperience.com. Contexto, the nonprofit that allows for Limbo to exist. And finally, the restaurant Limbo in Lisbon, the restaurant that gives name to the podcast. If you're there, tell Miguel, which is the owner, that the ex-neighbor named João from upstairs sent you there. Maybe he'll give you a discount, maybe he won't. You'll be in limbo until you ask. That being said, here's my conversation with Peyton Harvey.
All right.
Hey everyone, welcome to Limbo. My name is João, and today I have with me Peyton Harvey. Peyton, welcome to Limbo.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. And once again, I do love your shirt. Okay, just to putting
I
that on
appreciate
record.
it. Yeah, I appreciate swans and appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. So, Peyton, we're doing this because I was scrolling through some of the Interintellect salons that I wanted to do, and you had a salon that was really interesting. I signed up automatically. It's called What Does the Body Know? And it's happening on Sunday, May 25th. And I was so interested in the topic that I just reached out to you and asked you, hey, do you want to like record a show about it? And you were such a gracious guest that you told me, yeah, of course we'll do it. And so that's why we're here. And I can't wait to ask you about your relationship with the body, all of the different sources that you mentioned in the book, in the preparation for the salon, and all of the books. But before we do, I want to start with writing. So you, before we were recording, you mentioned that you have this great relationship with writing and creative writing. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how did that start?
Yeah, absolutely. So it sort of started in undergrad, and my major was history and political science, where I wrote a lot of research papers, and I really enjoyed that. It brought me to writing in sort of that first way, in a very like analytical academic way. And then my senior year, there was a class that I took. It was a creative nonfiction class with my professor, Felicia Chavez, who is one of my favorite people, role models. And that was the first time I actually engaged with creative writing versus research and analytical. And I remember three things that she taught us that stick in my mind that are sort of tools to engage with, and they are courage, honesty, um, and confidence in writing. So to engage with all of those sort of allows you to bring your vulnerability onto the page and write about the thing that scares you most, um, with these like parameters um, that I really connected to. I don't know if anyone else like connected to them as like strongly as I was. Like, that makes sense to me. Like, these make sense even though it's not like craft tools like you're supposed to write like this or like this amount a day. Like, these three things really spoke to me, and the essay that I wrote was something that I was most afraid to write about, and I had never written about my health issues or really anything personal in my life. And so the two subjects were romance and the medical issues that I had had sort of threaded
Mm-hmm.
together. So I sort of wrote like nobody is reading, sort of like the like counterpoint to like dance like nobody's watching. That's sort of how I had to
Mm-hmm.
approach it. And it's almost sort of like a dissociation where I'm like, I know that people are gonna read this, but you kind of have to write like that's not true.
Yeah.
uh, so that's where I guess writing became a point of healing and like sharing in that in this sphere where you don't have to speak or vocalize.
Mm-hmm.
There's something very like kinetic because you're moving your body, you're moving your hands, you're using a pen or keyboards to like process those emotions, and it feels different than just like trying to articulate everything just through words out loud. I don't know, it's a different feeling.
Yeah, no, I love that. I never thought about like of course you're hosting a salon on the body because you're the first person that is actually talking about the kinetic movement that you do while writing. So it makes sense that the body is something that you care about. Can you just repeat the three things? So courage, confidence, and honesty were those the three things?
Yeah.
Yeah,
uh,
and sorry, go ahead.
no, yeah, that's yeah, those were the three.
No, those really resonate, and I feel like it's from a teaching perspective, a lot of times we there's those students that really enjoy like the actual frameworks where it's just like give me the structure and I want to like know the structure. But then and that works with a lot of people. But I've find myself in you know by working on education, a lot of times we have these students that what they need is not around. It's not so much about the structure or anything. Are just these guiding this sense of direction, right? Like, well, right from a place of courage or honesty or confidence. So I feel like that deeply resonates with me. You mentioned the writing as a way of healing. Can you talk? Can you expand on that idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think specifically healing, there's different different elements of that. It can be like relationships, but specifically for me, for the health issues, I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma twice. The first time I was 12, and the second time I was 18 when I had just started college. And when I returned to school, I was sort of even afraid to say the word cancer. Like, it wasn't something I wanted to talk about. Nobody asked me questions really. I think they didn't really know how to engage with my experience because, as one Susan Sontag, one of the essays that I assigned, um, she talks about sort of the mystery around cancer and how it's sort of like it's so associated with death, and it's kind of weird and gross and bad, and nobody really knows how to discuss it in like a natural way. So that was sort of isolating to me. Um, and there are other things in my life that allowed me to find connections. I actually was a camp counselor at a camp for kids with cancer and their siblings. And so that was like an environment where I was able to feel a little bit normal about my
Yeah.
experience in this like abnormal setting. But so for writing, as I said, I wasn't planning on writing about that. It didn't
Yeah.
seem like something I ever even wanted to talk about. But somehow the page was more of a friend, a better listener. And I imagined it asking questions, perhaps. And it just became that like conduit for me to like get all the guts out of
Yeah.
that experience. Not all of them, but some.
Some, yeah, definitely. That makes so much sense. I want to go in. There's a couple of questions I want to ask about that. Before we do, you mentioned being like working on that camp. How was that experience like? Because I'm from an emotional perspective. On one hand, it's amazing. I'm assuming that it's very good for you because, as you were saying, like you finally found a place where you were kind of you kind of belong. It wasn't like this weird place because people are sharing some of those elements, as you mentioned, the Susan Sontag book, where people are afraid of talking about cancer, right? And so, as you were saying, like I can only imagine how isolating that was. At the same time, how was that experience? Because I'm assuming it's not. I don't know, maybe, and this is probably my own biases, but I'm assuming it's not a very, happy place. Was it? Like, walk me through how was that being a camp manager in that context?
Yeah, I think that's sort of the perspective that people have who haven't experienced it. So there is like this like sort of seriousness. There can be like a somberness to it, but there is this summer camp element. We play songs, we sing songs. We like the theme song is "Uptown Girl" by Billy Joel. Um, and
Great
there's like
song.
a campfire, there's amphitheaters, there's like the lake where there's like swimming, and not everybody can physically participate, but everyone is included. And even if like someone was in a wheelchair, they couldn't walk as well as other people, they're still like included, even in a physical way, in activities. But I would say that the first time I heard about the camp, it's called Okaizu, by the way. It's like a wonderful place in California. I was 12 and I saw a poster of it, and I was like, I'm never gonna go there. Like, I don't want to be around like cancer kids and be reminded of
Yeah.
that. So I never actually went there as a camper because I didn't want to be in a space where it reminded me of the hospital
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
nurses and everything. I was like, I'm done with that. I don't need to think about that. But later on, there was some sort of distance maybe that made me want to participate in that. And I spent I think four summers there for a few weeks at a time, and it was just so meaningful. I remember the first year I met a little girl named Olivia, and she had the same type of cancer as me, and she's like, "You're my best friend because you're nice and you have the same cancer as me." And we like looked at the
Oh,
stars, and she just like was so sweet, and I was so happy to like have that connection. She was like, as if I was meaningful to her, she was just at least or way more to me, to just like have that like specific strange weird connection that
yeah.
is very unusual in waking life or the real world, as whatever you would want to call it. But yeah, I met a lot of people there that just were there for like good reason. It was just like it was a good environment and more joyful than one might expect
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that
Once again.
context.
Yeah. Once again, it's my own bias, but
Yeah.
that sounds wonderful, and I never thought about it from that perspective. Of course, like people find these meaningful relationships in there and feel comprehended and in a way free, I guess, to just be like with that identity. You mentioned a beautiful phrase when we were describing like writing, where you said that maybe the page listens better, right? Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like, how are you? What do you think that means? Like that the page listens better.
I guess first of all, it's like a little bit more reliable than any sort of person. Every person has their own independent space where they're not like always available even emotionally. And I think I have a habit of feeling burdensome like emotionally, or I used
Mm,
to a little bit more, and now I have a little more like assurance that, especially when people who are like um don't even have to ask questions, but like are like curious enough
yeah,
to hold space
space.
for me, and I can hold space for them. And um, I think writing has allowed me to like start that process of being more confident in sharing and not being so hyper aware of like I don't think I was ever like judgmental of how people like asked about it. Some people just were like, oh, like what was the stage? Like what was it like did you almost die? And like yes,
Wow.
those things are like pretty serious and things to talk about, but it's kind of at that surface level. Um, but I also have a lot of understanding where if people haven't gone through something like that, they don't know how to approach even a question to ask necessarily.
Yeah.
Um, so that has allowed me to be able to just discuss it vocally as I wasn't able to before. Um, and it's become a little bit more of a casual thing, which is good. That's always I didn't expect it to be. It always felt very
Heavy.
heavy to me,
Yeah.
and I didn't want to be like heavy to other people. So I think that's why I didn't really talk about it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, I would guess that as you go and put your own thoughts through writing, as you were saying, like you build confidence on, okay, so this is what I think about, and I can talk about these things because I actually took a moment to understand what I feel. Because I guess that once again, I've never been in that position. I've met people that were, and I feel like you probably went through, and maybe I'm guessing wrong, but I can only guess that in that situation, like you have so many things going through your head that it may be hard to actually understand how you feel, right? And in that way, writing may be a very good thing to do because you get to put your thoughts into the page and actually clarifying, yeah, you know what, this is how I feel about this. So let me ask you one more question before we kind of shift into dancing and how that affected dancing. Um, if you had to mention some of the transformations that you underwent as you went through that process, like what were some of the things that you feel like changed by having gone through that process and that issue?
Yeah. Um, I think I started to just operate at a different level than other people. It's not like a good or bad thing. I felt sort of like
Disconnected.
returning to college, like, there's like this impulse to just want to like have fun at parties and like, do well in school and like go to games. And when I went to those parties, I just felt like so cerebral and in my head, I'm like, this is like I just went through this thing. Like, why is everyone just like dancing and being sweaty and kissing each other? And like, it just felt so sort of foreign to me. And so, like, over time, that space of isolation has been like somehow like the opposite. Like, now it feels like I can connect with people in like a wider way because of like that feeling of being a little bit like an outsider. Um, and also, I used to hate this line. My favorite singer, Andrew Bird, he has a song called Near Death Experience. And one of the lines is like, and we dance like cancer survivors, simply grateful just to be alive. And I'm like, oh, that's so annoying. But also at the same time, it's like, sometimes I just feel so immensely grateful for just like going on a walk or like smelling something really nice and, and like eating like well, now I eat meat again, so eating like a really
Yeah.
good like burger, like
Yeah.
something like that. but sometimes I just like feel just like, wow, like I'm so grateful just like for this sense.
Yeah.
And like it doesn't always feel like that. I still like worry a lot. I get very stressed, I get sad, but it's like around this sort of like intensity of like, and it also kind of leads into anxiety in a way where it's like I want this moment to like to be here because I know that like moments aren't guaranteed. I know like my future isn't guaranteed, so sometimes like I have a habit of like holding on to things so tightly and like I want this to stay, so I'm trying to sort of
Mm,
let go a little bit and
yeah.
have like a little more like ephemerality.
Yeah. That's such a wonderful answer. Thank you. Um, so let's go into dancing.
Mm-hmm.
When I was watching your salon and I was going through the readings and I was just looking at the picture that you chose, etc. I was like, okay, Brandon kind of seems like someone who, because, and this is a very noob mistake, but I totally forgot about reading your bio in Interintellect. I just went straight for Twitter, and in your bio you do mention that you dance and you're a dancer, but I didn't have that context, so I was going through the different sources, and I was like, I think that Peyton has to be a dancer. And before we started off, like you actually confirmed that, and so I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. So walk me through your journey with dancing and maybe your relationship with it.
Mm-hmm. I guess I'll start just like chronologically. I
Mm,
started dancing when I was 3.5 years old. It was just the classic tap ballet, and then jazz a little bit later. And later on in high school, I started modern dance, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And modern dance really spoke to me a lot more than any other
I see.
style before. But the first time I was diagnosed, um, I was 12 years old, and dancing was my favorite thing, I would say, probably. I had like taken soccer lessons and not lessons, just done soccer and
Practice,
PE
yeah.
lessons. Yeah. um, and I was like all excited about my schedule because I was like, I'm dancing every day. I'm like such like I'm so busy with my dance, and I don't like
Mm.
soccer anymore. Except I did like being the goalie and just like spacing out and doing cartwheels back there. That was my favorite thing. Um, but so dancing became really a part of me at like before I was 12, and then that was my first diagnosis, and I didn't really know what to expect. Like I remember the first time, like my parents told me that I had cancer because they had heard it um, before, and my siblings knew before I did. And so my first question was, "Will I lose my hair?" It was sort of like a panic thing, and I was like, I thought of like Bailey from Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but she was like the only person I thought of, like, because she had leukemia and she also
Mm.
died at the end of the film. I was like, well, that's not great.
Yeah.
Those were like the thoughts that ran through my mind as I was like in shock mode. Those like basic things, and then I didn't really, it's hard to imagine like what actually happens to the body through chemotherapy, unless you actually experience it. And it's sort of a slow process of like getting smaller and weaker through the chemotherapy, which is sort of like a strange thing. Like these, it's like poisonous things that are poisoning you, but they're trying to get you better. And
Mm-hmm.
they're making you like so weak and you can't walk. And I remember the nurses telling me to imagine some sort of dance so that when I get back into the real world, that I would like the path would be faster and more amplified. Like if
Mm.
I started to imagine something. And I remember thinking of the Nutcracker, specifically the San Francisco version, which we went to every year. And at the end, in the Grand Pas de Deux, there's grown up Clara, and she's in this turquoise and gold tutu, which is like the most beautiful thing. And I was imagining her in like when she does this like beautiful arch at the crescendo, and climax of the song. And I remember just being like, that's something I can't do and I maybe will never do. And it, like, instead of being inspiring, it was like really
Yeah.
painful. I was like, oh, like, no, like, I am not in that seat watching that anymore. I'm not on stage. I'm not in a studio. Like, um, it was just really painful just to think about that. And at 12, like, I sort of went straight back to dance, like, after a lot of like physical therapy and healing.
Mm-hmm.
So I did return to it later on. And then, yeah, I continued through when I was 18, and then I lost dance again. And then I thought that I was on the right track. But this is one of the things that we were talking about where you lose it. And I went to Bates Dance Festival, which I had gone to when I was 15, which is this like 3 week intensive in the summer. And I had had like an injury that was like left over from my treatment. It was like this like injury on my foot that made me unable to bear weight on it.
Mm.
And I was sort of delusional. I was like, I'm just going to go dance. And I haven't really danced for a while, but I'm going to do this intensive dance festival. And so when I started, like the first day, I was like in the modern class, and they watched me, and they watched that I like was unable to move very well, and like not as well as the other dancers, and I couldn't like spiral and come back up, which is like a modern dance technique. They're like, they brought me over and they're like, you need to go to the lower class, and like, and somehow like that just that was, you know, pain, like you kind of forget how it feels. So that felt just as painful as cancer in that moment. I was like, no, like I'm a dancer. Like, what are you saying? Like, I can't go
Yeah.
back to the lower class. Like, I know that I can do it, but I couldn't physically. And so after that, I didn't dance for years, I think.
Yeah.
Because it was so like heartbreaking,
Painful.
and I was like crying my eyes out just because I was, it just like was something I knew I could do and I was good at it. Um, and I was confident before. And so it took a really long time for me to return to dance in that way, just because of that mental and emotional block. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, thank you for that beautiful answer, and for the vulnerability into sharing. As you were mentioning before recording, like most people that listen to the podcast, they know me for the entrepreneurial journey and the whole thing around education. But I started off as a jazz musician, and I feel like we were talking before pressing record that, you know, I think you're one of those people that can actually understand the pain that I went through when I had the wrist injury and suddenly realized that I was never going to be able to play at the level that I wanted to. And I remember, like, and I say to people that that was the most painful moment in my life, and people think that I'm over exaggerating, that it doesn't make sense, but
Hmm.
the truth is, it was. And I remember, like, after, so I had to completely stop for a while, and then after stopping for a long time, like I got back to the guitar, and I kept having these experiences where I would hear a musical sentence. So I was playing jazz, and so I was improvising, and I would hear this music sentence in my brain, and I was like, yes, this is what I want to play, this is what makes sense. And then I would go into the physical body, and my body wouldn't respond.
Hmm.
And that experience of having that gap was so painful, because of course sometimes you think about things even when you're at like regular stages in your art, and you think about something that you cannot do, right? I mean, that happened to me a lot of times, and I was like, okay, I need to practice in order to be able to achieve that level. But at that moment, like, very simple sentences, things that I was able to do when I was in high school, suddenly I was in college, and I wasn't just able to translate that into the physical motion that was necessary to play that chord or that melody. And And so I would just stop playing. We were playing and it was my time to solo, and I would play, and I would stop and I would look at the floor, and I would just feel like so sad and and in a way empty, because it was like, this is my way of expressing myself, and suddenly I cannot do it anymore. So how can I express that? And so I feel like there's definitely I definitely understand what you were mentioning, of being extremely sad, of having that gap between what your mind says that you can do, and then what your actually
Mm-hmm.
physical body, what you can do. Um, you mentioned that it took you a long time to go back to dancing. Can you tell me what made you like actually have the courage to go back?
Mm-hmm. Um, Strangely, it was after, well, this past year I had like several relationships end, mostly romantic
Mm-hmm.
relationships. One was very long term, one was a little shorter term. And some of them made me very angry about how I would like accept things. And I wish that would have been like, this is not okay. I want to walk away from this, but I didn't. So I was very disappointed in sort of like my weakness. And I think if I had been more connected to my body and its instincts, like I had been before, I think I would have been able to make better decisions. And that sounds like very nebulous, but once I started getting back into dance, it sort of like reconnected me with that emotional outlet, and I didn't feel the need to like idolize other people or say,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you know this more than me, or I need to learn from you. It's more like I trust myself more because I understand like what my body is telling me. And so
Mm-hmm.
um, the first sort of step I took was taking this Intro to Martha Graham technique class at the Center for the Arts, and that was taught by this woman named Charlotte Landreau, and she was the principal dancer at the Martha Graham uh, company for 10 years. And she is just a wonderful teacher. And in that class, there were children. And so that was very humbling. So they were learning the same thing as I was, but it was a very like structured technique that was simple but challenging. And so I had to really approach it like with beginner's mind, like I'm not going to be competitive with these
With the little
8-year-olds.
children.
And I'm gonna be like, okay, whatever happens, happens. I know I'm not as strong. I know I'm not as flexible as I was before. But just like approaching that with a lot of self compassion,
Mm-hmm.
which I had to do because I was like, it doesn't feel the same, and it was painful at first because it has been a long journey to gain all those skills,
Mm-hmm.
but thankfully they have this class, excuse me, where you can take a class with the members of the company, and it's one of them teaches the class 3 times a week, and they switch, and you learn each of their styles. So I've been able to really learn like different modern techniques and relearn what I already knew and be reminded of a lot of things and grow back into my dancing ability. And now I'm going to be able to participate in some summer intensives again, um, which are like some of the top ones in the country. Um, which sounds like bragging, but I'm happy that I'm part of that. So I'm really
Yeah.
happy that I'm able to like participate and really connect to dancing again. And yeah, that was sort of just like I knew that if I got back into dancing, something good would happen. I didn't know what, but I think a lot of good has happened because I
Mm-hmm.
took that step.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And that makes a lot of sense, and I'm so happy for you. Did you you had to reframe your relationship with dancing, and if you did, like, what were the changes? So I'll give you my example. So of course, music, for especially jazz, for the longest time was um, like it wasn't only just the profession that I had, or the identity that I have, but for the longest time was a way of expression. So the way that I would express myself was through improvisation and through music and through jazz, and eventually I had to reframe music and jazz in a different way, um, and I had to find other ways of expressing myself, because if I kept looking at music through those lenses, I don't think I would ever be able to play anymore, just because like it would it would just bring so much pain, because it would feel like I'm not able to express myself fully, right? So I had to reframe it as more of a, sometimes I have a lot of going on in my mind, and I just go back to the guitar and just spend time in there just to clear my head, and just to not just have fun in a way that you can have fun watching a show or playing a game. It's like it's like this grounding activity of, yes, this, like, I can find a space to be with myself through this medium, through music. So it's no longer about expressing myself to others, but maybe more of a space that I can hold for myself. And so that was like the way I reframe it. Did you had to do the same thing with dancing? And if so, like, what would you say are the changes?
Yeah, I would first say like both like jazz, music, dance, creative outlets are a way of like feeling alive. And so to lose that is sort of a little bit
Absolutely.
of a death. So
Yeah.
like that's why it can feel so painful
That's
because
such
it's
a great
like
way to put it.
yeah. And so dancing for me was sort of a language that I learned alongside just like English. You
Language.
know,
Yeah.
I was a, not a toddler. I don't know what 3.5 is, but like
You're a
I
little
took it for
kid.
yeah. I was a little kid, just tapping, and I from the very beginning, it was like a natural thing that made me happy, and um, I took it for granted, I think, as like an emotional outlet that helped me like throughout
Mm-hmm.
the whole time I was doing it. And I didn't realize even how meaningful it was just outside of like bringing me joy or being this creative thing. And I never even thought of myself as like a creative because dance just didn't seem to me that way. But now I really do think it is, yeah, it's an art. It's such a creative, like athletic art. It's a very like fascinating and intellectual and physical, and it's a very amazing thing that I didn't realize really what it meant to me until
Mm-hmm.
it went away. So
Mm-hmm.
you don't know what it you got till it's gone, I guess.
Yeah.
uh, but yeah, I think now I even value it in a different way, in a wider and more human way, just like in a historical way. It's so interesting to learn like where different styles come from, and I just wonder like who was the first person to sort of just like groove and dance, and like it just seems so natural and human to do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's such a great framework. I feel like one of the things I'll end with this before actually going to the salon, but um, I feel like a lot of times um, people. So when you practice an art, no matter what the art is, if it's dancing, music, painting, whatever, there's this internal tension in you as the musician, the dancer, the artist, whatever, where it's like there's a pursuit of mastery, of trying to get better at it over and over again, and there's this underlying sense of pleasure of doing it that sometimes, like, they feel a lot at least with me, they were in a lot of tension, because sometimes in order for me to get to a certain level in music, I wasn't having the pleasure playing. Whereas sometimes when I was having the most pleasure playing, I know that that wasn't the thing that I had to do in order to get better from a technical standpoint, right? Um, and I will say something, and I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but I will say that today, when I play, I lean way more heavily into the pleasure side than the technical side. And in that sense, I feel like it unlocks a different thing within me that if I had always the technical pressure, I would never be able to feel. But I feel like as you like, there's this great. Allow me just to go in this very quick tangent. But there's this anime called Blue Period that I got recommended by a friend on Twitter a couple of years ago. I totally forgot about it, and eventually, like recently, last week, I ended up finishing. And it's about this art student, and there's a line at a given moment where her mom, like the mom from the main character, says something like, "Well, he'll do his best because he likes painting. Like he was painting and he was getting ready for this exam, and the main character says something like, "Well, just because I like something, it doesn't mean that it's always pleasurable." Right? And I feel like there's this conception of artists where if you're practicing your art, that means that you're having fun all the time, you're enjoying it all the time. And that's not the case. And so that was one of the things that I really gained from all of this, was that now when I play, I only play for the fun of it, and for the and for the holding space for myself, and for the grounding, and not with the pressure of the technique. I was wondering if the same thing happened to you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting for modern dance where there is sort of this, you have to sink in to this like confusing space where it's not just about technical ability or virtuosity. It's sort of about like connecting to this like playfulness and sort of, I guess it's similar like modern art where it's like
Mm,
obviously like Picasso or Miro can like paint a perfect like technical thing, but to engage with that sort of like childlike creativity is actually challenging, and it takes a lot of work and practice. So that comes more naturally to me recently because I've had to
mm,
not be as virtuosic and technically proficient as everyone else. So I have to like, or maybe it is just something that I like, that playful element where things are kind of confusing and like, with improvisation, it's like, oh, you kind of have to respond to people, but who's leading, who's following, and I think a lot of people who are professionals actually have a little bit of discomfort with that because
mm-hmm.
they're so good, they're so um, like perfect in a
Yeah.
way, and so I've had to become so imperfect that I'm like, okay, let's do that. Like let's be like weird and like improv-y and like not really know where this is going. And that's a space that
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually very comfortable in.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. I feel like the when when I play music still to these days, and when I was playing, that hasn't changed. Like that's the place where I feel more comfortable at in the chaos. I spend a lot of time after leaving jazz, writing about it and thinking about it, and like I feel like it's, we call it, there was this term that I used, which was spontaneous composition, where you're trying to compose something as things are happening, right? And I feel like that's such a beautiful space to be in, but it can also be an extremely difficult space to be in if you don't have the kind of, um, I'm not sure if self awareness is a skill, but like you just need to be comfortable in being flexible, right?
Mhm.
In adjusting. And I feel like a lot of times people from, classical dancing, I would assume, in classical music for sure, they don't have that flexibility. They're used to no, this is the perfect way of doing it, and we do not compromise perfection, which is an absolute, like, it makes sense. Like, a lot of people do enjoy that. But that's why I feel like whenever a classical musician would come into a jam session and they would start to try and play, they would have this hard time of letting go of their internal notion of perfection. From my understanding, like you mentioned this before we were recording, but like maybe like ballet, once again, this classical dancing is more about the perfection, whereas modern is engaging with all these different emotions while something happening. In that sense, it's almost like this dichotomy of classical musical and jazz as well. Um, so yeah, so that's beautiful. Let's move on into the salon. So
Mm-hmm.
you have the salon is happening on May 25th, if I'm not mistaken, exactly May 25th.
Mm-hmm.
And walk me through, like, what's the theme, and what are some of your thoughts around the question of what does the body know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the title is What Does the Body Know? It's sort of exploring like what information resides in the body and how does it relate to the mind, and what it means to be human without movement. I think a lot of people can relate to that, not even with illness, but even like my sister was pregnant recently and she has a new baby. And so that is almost like a disability of sorts because she's such an athletic person, like bike rider and um, just extremely like competent athletically. And so to not have that as an emotional release is very like jarring, and you have to like engage with things that you haven't had to before, in that way. But also for illness, it's like it's a different thing. So I these are sort of the questions that I'm like posing, and I know that what excites me about conversations in general is that we were mentioning it's sort of like an improvisational exercise. So I'm very excited for these different voices to be heard, and like throw their ideas out there, and to I want to hear about their personal experiences and creative lives, and um, I hope that people will be comfortable like like sharing whatever
Sharing.
they want. So I'm excited about the conversation aspect for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a great topic. I want to go through over your sources and why you think that those readings, or what are you trying to accomplish with those readings. But I, as I said, like the topic of the salon makes absolute sense, and if someone listening to this conversation can quickly understand why. Um, if before going to the readings, if I ask you what does your body know, what would you answer?
Whew. I posed the question. I don't have a specific answer for that, but that's if okay. I need a moment to think about that. So
Of
the
course.
body holds so much memory that I think intellectually don't hold. So I think writing or even like meditation or creative outlets can reveal a lot of that. But at the same time, there's so much that I don't think we will ever learn that exists in like genetically, like from like a long time, just as a Homo sapien, there's like things, it's like the mechanics of our body that just like go along, chugga, chugga, like, I don't, but that is just sort of like instinctual. And then things that intellectually we hold and emotionally we hold that stay with us, and I don't know if the
Mm-hmm.
body chooses what's important or not, or if it can release what's important.
Yeah.
um, but to engage with like what does it hold and what do we want to keep, and some maybe we want to keep things in our body and we don't want to remember them, but they're still there. And so
Mm-hmm.
like at a certain point, if we live long enough, we have to confront it. And that's one of my sort of life paths is I don't really avoid any emotion if I can. Like I try to acknowledge like, okay, I'm feeling sadness, I'm feeling envy, I'm feeling like all these like strange subtle feelings, and I try to identify it and where it, like if it's like in my left shoulder, if it's in my forehead, and to like try to like physically identify that emotion. And sometimes it works, and it's gotten easier over time, that approach for me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good question. One of the things that I'm really curious about is that I feel like in modern culture we have a growing disconnection with our own bodies. So because we spend so much time on our minds, and a lot of people are always thinking, like, especially if you're a knowledge worker or something like that, like you're on your computer the whole day, you're reading, you're writing, you're thinking about things, you're trying to articulate, you're meeting with other people, and so it's almost like there's this extreme mentality, in opposed to this extreme physicality that we had for hundreds and thousands of years. Um, do you think that that's the case, first of all, and what do you think are some of the consequences of that?
I think like, well, especially like in the United States, I think about like the medical like facilities or approach that we have to illness, is very clinical, and it doesn't like, sometimes they're like, okay, here's a social worker, here's like someone from church to talk to you about like what's going on in your mind. And I was like, okay, whatever, like I don't want to talk to them. um, but I actually have been thinking a lot about therapy versus spirituality, and I think there's a lot of opposition there, especially like Western therapy, where it doesn't, sometimes it engages with the body, but in a very like, it's almost too objective in a way. And I think objectivity doesn't imply truth. There's information there, but also subjectivity can have truth as well. So objectivity and subjectivity have this sort of like yin yang thing, where both of them are very important, and neither one is like necessarily inherently more true than the other. That's what I think about a lot. And so just going back to like that medical component, obviously it's about the body and it's about healing the body, but it's very, I don't know, like very chemical, very structured. And a lot of the challenge I had was not only in the treatment itself, but afterward, where they kind of just release you into the wild, and there's no really rubric for what to do. And you can go to a therapist and talk about it, but like that's only a very minor way of healing. And I actually have this goal in life to create an organization geared towards that space, especially for like people from 12 to 18, like after cancer, like
Yeah.
a space for them to heal and like have like all different like holistic therapies, even like psychedelic stuff or art or dance, and have this like space to process, not just be like, oh, like your body's done, the cancer is gone, and you're good.
Now
Just
go.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, you're good, like whatever.
Here's the door. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, you're fine, right? Okay, like we got other people to work on. So,
Yeah.
but I think there's so much in that space that is just not really cared for, at least from my understanding.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Have you read the book "The Body Keeps Score"?
I've been recommended to it. I think I have like some sort of like fear around it. I want to read it, but
Okay.
I
Okay.
definitely
Okay.
did.
Okay. No, because the only reason why I'm asking that is because I'm about to ask you about your choice of readings for the salon, But as I was going through them, I was like, okay, so the body keeps score is going to be here, and it wasn't. I was like, oh, what it is. We won't talk about the book then. Let's go over your reading. Walk me through. So, I went through all of them, and the illness as metaphor, the book by Susan Sontag that we've mentioned, that was the only one where I was like, what is she trying to get here? And then, of course, knowing you and knowing your personal story, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes absolute sense. But walk me through the choices of the different readings, and what are you aiming at for each one of them?
Yeah, I think I chose. I tried to have a wide spectrum, and so
Very
while
good
like my
word at that.
yeah, my initial instinct or curiosity about the subject was sort of geared towards like illness, and then like what does it mean to not have movement. So the Susan Sontag work was very like a natural choice for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had sort of read it earlier, but now that I'm like rereading it again, I appreciate it so much. And I have it actually right here. So the first sentence of the first prologue is: illness is the night side of life, a more onerous citizenship. Everyone who is born holds dual citizenship in the kingdom of the well and in the kingdom of the sick. And all we prefer to use only the good passport, sooner or later each of us is obliged, at least for a spell, to identify ourselves as citizens of that other place.
Mm-hmm.
So illness as place, as like being a citizen of that.
Yeah.
Like reading can just make me feel so connected. Like as a bookworm, like it always just like you don't have to talk to people. You can just read a book and be like, yeah, like other people have experienced that too.
Yeah.
And so that's a very powerful work to me for Susan Sontag, and she talks about like the sentimentality around cancer, about medical like paternalization, where like they tell like family members first, and they don't tell you everything about the disease, which is very weird. Like I didn't even know like the stage when I was 12. I didn't know like a lot of things about the treatment itself, and I think they had to obscure that,
Some
and
of the things, yeah.
I didn't know like my survival rate or anything like that. So I do now. I kind of looked into it, um, but so that's sort of the main illness one, and then I wanted to have something a little more creative and a little bit lighter. But so I have a couple dance themed ones. So one
Mm-hmm.
is sort of about Martha Graham, and it has a long quote about how she perceives creative flow,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of how artists are like always dissatisfied in a way, because we're
Yes.
always like seeking something. And to like I've always like just had high expectations of life ever since I was little, and I think that's like good in a lot of ways. It makes you like work hard to like maintain those expectations and do well for yourself and others, but at the same time I want to like sort of soften that a little bit. And so artists, I think, especially have like this sort of like even with themselves, it's like this perfectionist. It's like this is never quite right. Like
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know exactly if that's like what she means by that, but um, even when you finish something, there's always this ache of like, oh, I need to do this thing now. You
Yeah,
know.
I love how we went from a little bit more, a reading that's slightly more light, and you're just going through a reading that says, but then there is no satisfaction whatever at any time. She cried out passionately. There is only a queer divine dissatisfaction. It's like, well,
Yeah.
that's light. Yeah, sure, okay,
Yeah.
got it.
I can never stay quite like free, birdie. No, there's always like that.
Yeah.
Dancers like have that, I think, where they have to be like, this is the real. It's like it's real. You can't like
No, but
not be.
absolutely. But by the way, I love that idea. I don't think I agree with it though, but I loved how she framed it. Like, the no satisfaction, whatever, at any time she cried out passionately. There is only a queer divine dissatisfaction, a blessed unrest that keeps us marching and makes us more alive than the others. And I just hesitate calling it. I mean, maybe dissatisfaction is the word, but it's not. And fortunately, I have a couple of days before the salon to actually think about this and then be able to articulate it then. But I feel like it's the word dissatisfaction. I I agree with it in the sense that there's something lacking in reality, and through my art, through my agency, I get to try and bring something here that somehow matches that, but it never will. And so there's this eternal pursuit of trying, and I get that feeling of dissatisfaction. I will say, however, that I feel like there is the possibility of satisfaction in what you did, even if it's not complete. But maybe that's because but that's how I always thought about music, because jazz demands of you that's the case. Like, you will never be able to improvise a perfect solo, because a perfect solo doesn't exist. But you need to be able to listen to your music, and at a given moment where you actually play something good, you need to be able to say, yeah, I played that good. I don't remember the musician, but I remember someone mentioning that they recorded an album, they were listening to the solos, and another musician said about its own solo, oh wow, I sounded really good there. And this other guy thinking, wait, you can say good things about your music, about the way you play. And it's like, yeah, you can. So even though I do agree that there's this eternal dissatisfaction of there's something missing it, and I get to try and use my agency and my tools and my art to build something with it, which I think touches on making us artists more alive than the others. I still think that there's room to have satisfaction in what you build. I don't know.
No, I agree with that. I think it's like a strong word. And I think maybe like growth is like sort of a way to approach it. Like
Yeah,
you can always like learn from something.
yeah,
So it's not like this like, oh, I'm not happy with that. I think
yeah.
dissatisfaction sort of implies like unhappiness in a way.
Mm-hmm.
um, where you can be very happy with your work and even be content with how it turned out. I think some people, yeah, sometimes I'm like, yeah, that was good. I like that. But
Yeah,
then you always like life isn't finished until you die.
yeah,
So like there's always this sort of like I want to do something else now.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Walk me through some of the other choices. So you have a great article from Teen House, which is basically an excerpt of Abandon Me by Melissa Phoebus, which I had never heard of. Yet yesterday night, it was like 2 a.m. I was going through the readings, and I finished this one, and I immediately ordered a book because I really enjoyed it. Walk me through the choice of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hold on a second. I'm grabbing it right here because I
The book,
have it.
yeah,
So this is, yeah, Abandon Me, Tin
yeah,
House. So Melissa Phoebus is sort of known for writing about the body and sexuality and relationships. And I guess one of her past lives, she was like a dominatrix, so she kind of writes that a little bit, and she mentions that a lot of in her writing. But at a very like at a line level, there's so much of the body and like senses. So that's sort of
absolutely.
why I I brought it into this conversation. And so sort of like when I was reading it, I was just underlining like all the really good verbs and physical language that she was using. And one of the lines is like, "You're so beautiful," she said again. "Your mouth reinvents the word mouth." And burning my fingers and carving her mouth, and um, Yeah. Oh, okay. This was my favorite line here. So she's also very academic. So something what I really love is like she can have like pop culture and like
Yeah.
relationships, but also like she threads it through like research. And
Mm-hmm.
I really like that sort of that approach that she has. And so she says, uh, one of the people that she's referencing is Bergson believed that the more a spirit draws from his true memory and exists in an awareness of the past in conjunction with the immediacy of the bodily experience, the more conscious she becomes. So this like knowledge of the body and like awareness of the immediacy of its needs, I guess this is what I'm taking. The more conscious you become at like a cognitive or emotional level. So like the knowledge of either space influences either one. And so for a lot of things I read, I'm like, there's so many interpretations, and sometimes I feel like I don't really know even like what she's trying to say, but like this is what I'm taking from that. And so that's
Yeah.
where I think everyone can just that's all they can do, unless they're
Yeah.
like PhD expert person. But yeah,
And even
but
then, it has to be a very
yeah,
specific thing.
yeah. But that's why like she's has a really good way of just describing like the body experience in relation to the mind and academic and physical and all these kinds of things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really loved her writing, and I'll say that that's one of the most beautiful things of the salons is just that subjectivity that you were talking about. Um, this is where like it shines. Like one of the things that I absolutely love about TSE, the school where I work in, is that a lot of what we do is we teach through the Socratic method, where basically you're asking questions, you're reading a text, and then you're asking, well, like, what do you think about this, and and just to have that openness to the subjectivity of others, and this active curiosity into understanding different points of view of the same thing in order to complement your own worldview. I think it's one of the most beautiful things that human beings can have, and having a salon is just a beautiful way to put it. There's one last source that I want to go over. The you chose On Walking by Henry David Thoreau. I absolutely love that text. I've held two different Socratic seminars on that text. I've written
Oh,
about
really?
it.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, I've really enjoyed it. It's like in our school on so in TSE we have this orientation week where it's the first week where students are coming in, and some of the students are new, some of them are people that have been with us for a long time, and we have this text that we share with everyone on orientation week. And On Walking was this year. I also led a summer Socratic on it, and I've written about it, and it's just filled with so many things that I love, and I would definitely recommend everyone to reading it. But the actual source that I would love to talk with or to have your perspective is the one that's remaining, which was by Nancy Stark Smith, and it's called Riding the Wild Beast Back to Its Den. And I would love to get the perspective on why you chose this particular reading.
Well, first of all, I just sort of wanted to give a voice to Nancy Stark Smith, which is she writes so much about dance. And I think that's like such a challenging thing to do, writing about anything related to the body, but like to articulate that in words. So I remember first reading her in a class I took in college and just like really resonating with what she wrote. And so she um, is a choreographer who's pretty well known. She died a few years ago, I think, in 2020. But she has these like shorter, like I think like op-ed pieces, and that's the one of those is the thing that I chose. And she just like has this like wildness but precision in the way that she writes. So like she talks about like heartbreak and like the like how that affects like the body. And I don't have it like right in front of me, but just reading just how like creative flow and like
Yeah.
working with other people, working with other bodies like influences you. and engaging with like creative works. And she created actually this specific improvisation technique, I think, called the underscore, which is like very used widely in modern dance. It's related to contact improvisation, where like people like improv and like sort of um, engage with other people's bodies in an improvisational way. And it's just like a very fascinating thing to witness and be a part of. And so to be able to write that on the page and talk about dance, heartbreak, and all these different things that are related to that space of the mind and
Yeah.
body. She's really wonderful at that.
And she also writes beautiful. I'll read one of my favorite parts of that op-ed, if you don't mind. It's this quote: "They can hear my weight shift in that last moment of falling, feel just what force is necessary to balance the kooky flow of my weight, suggesting through a tiny shift of their touch a solution to our movement puzzle and next chapter to our story. Through touch and movement, we love, cherish, challenge, and rail on each other as long as it lasts. This continues to be a great part of my pleasure in dancing." And I was reading this, and I was like, well, I don't enjoy dancing, but I would love to feel this. So, very, very good writing. Very good choice of readings and resources, Peyton. We're running out of our time, and I want to be respectful of it. So, I have just one last question. If people want to know more about you, if people want to reach out to you, if people want to connect with you, what are the best ways to do so?
I've been engaging with social media a little bit more in the last couple of years because I find it just like Interintellect, like it's I, unavoidable is sort of a negative way to look at it, but I think uh, it's like it's a privilege to be able to be like virtually connected to people from like places that you wouldn't be able to uh, just in a what's it called, analog way. So
Yeah.
like I, even though I'm a little bit of like a neophobe, I do appreciate the virtual world and virtual space. So I do have an Instagram where there's a lot of like dance that I share, and Twitter is really more about this manuscript that I have about Liv Ullmann, the Norwegian actress who I have a creative obsession and love with. So that's a lot of my like expression of my love for her there. So Twitter, Instagram, I have. Yeah, that's a kind of all you need to know. And then the host salon that I will be doing, and I hope everyone joins that. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. We'll leave the links of the description. We didn't even talk about that, about the Liv Ullmann. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right.
Yeah.
We'll definitely get an episode 2 with you just to talk about that. But yeah, we'll leave all of those links in the description so people can follow you. And of course, we'll leave the link in the description of your salon. It happens on Sunday, May 25th. I'm not sure at what time zone do you want to share this, like from in GMTs at 7 p.m. But what about your time zone?
Mountain time, I think it's noon.
There
So
you go.
Pacific time, 11. Is that in an hour?
I think so. I think so. I think so. Yeah, I should have done the work of thinking about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, but 7 p.m. Wait, no, 7 p.m. 1 p.m. Central Time. Okay, so we just covered a bunch of different time zones. So everyone listening, there's probably yours is somewhere around here. So we'll definitely leave the link to your salon as well. Peyton, thank you so much. This was wonderful. Please, to everyone, go ahead and follow Peyton. And while you're following her, maybe you wanna follow us on YouTube as well, and leave a like and a comment on Limbo and in our show. That being said, everyone, I will see you all in the next episode. Peyton, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.